School bully. Shoves quiet. Old woman. Regrets. It 10 seconds later, when she learns who she is. A soldier died. A mother was erased. And a 10-year-old girl went silent for 5 years. Because her mom tried to save a life. This wasn't an accident. This was how America punished a black woman for doing her job. Her name? Aaliyah Carter. 10 years old when she watched her mother, a decorated Army field nurse who had saved dozens on the battlefield, get torn apart for one decision. One dose of epinephrine, one missed allergy, one death. And just like that, honor gone. Trust vanished. Nobody defended her. Nobody asked why. And from that day on, Aaliyah learned. Never make a mistake. Never let them see you break. Never rely on anyone. 5 years later, she walks into middle school like a blade wrapped in denim. No one messes with her. No one dares. Teachers avoid her. Students whisper behind lockers. But no one asks what she's guarding. Because they don't see a girl in pain, they see a problem to manage. Then one day, a 72-year-old woman in a rhinestone church hat and a navy skirt suit walks into her classroom, eyes sharp, posture unshaken. And when their eyes meet, Aaliyah flinches for the first time. That day, something cracks, not with noise, but with a single sentence. Who are you when no one's watching? They said she was just a girl, but the hallways knew better. They bent around her like wind around a blade. You could hear it in the hush that followed her steps, the glances exchanged behind locker doors, and how even the loudest boys lowered their voices when she passed. Her name was Aaliyah Carter. 15. Raised in Atlanta, Georgia. But there was something about her that didn't belong in one place. She carried the weight of something older than her years, like the echo of a lesson learned too early and remembered too well. She didn't lead with noise. Her presence was quieter than that, but no less commanding. She didn't yell. She stared. She didn't push. She positioned. And it worked. Until the morning an old woman walked into that school and refused to look away. But to understand Aaliyah Carter is to understand what shaped her, not in broad strokes, but in sharp, jagged lines, etched deep by memory and grief. When she was 10, she watched her mother, a decorated Army field nurse, stand her ground against a superior officer. It was supposed to be a moment of pride, but it turned tragic. The soldier on the cot had a quiet allergy that no one double-checked. One dose, and he was gone. One argument, and her mother's reputation, years of sacrifice, was suspended like it never existed. The uniform remained. The trust disappeared. That moment rewired something in Aaliyah. She never said it aloud, but learned early that authority wasn't wisdom, and being right didn't always save lives. So she crafted herself into someone who'd never have to apologize, never second-guess, never surrender. She moved through middle school like a force field wrapped in denim and defiance. No teacher could reach her. No peer could get close. What looked like attitude was armor, welded out of silence and self-preservation. Adults whispered about her potential, but they said it like a warning, not a compliment, like she was a fire they couldn't extinguish, only try to contain. But here's the truth. Aaliyah Carter wasn't trying to burn anything down. She was trying not to collapse. Because under the confidence was a girl who had seen what happens when the world you believe in turns its back. She didn't trust praise. She didn't believe in mercy. She didn't think the system saw her as anything more than a file. And maybe she was right. She had no idea that her greatest lesson wouldn't come from a textbook or detention slip. It would walk through the doors as a 72-year-old woman in a navy skirt suit and rhinestone-covered church hat. not a teacher, not a counselor. A former army sergeant named Freeman. A woman who didn't need to raise her voice to raise the bar. A woman who didn't blink. What happens when an unstoppable force meets someone who refuses to flinch? This isn't just a story about a student. It's about the quiet war waged inside so many young people in this country. Those who've inherited trauma, who wear toughness like skin, and who've been told that feeling is weakness. It's about a girl who looked unbreakable on the outside, but was quietly hoping someone would see she was already cracked, and care enough not to walk away. And it begins, not with fire, but with silence. Some memories don't live in photographs. They live in the quiet, where voices go flat and footsteps grow soft, where a child learns that some truths are too heavy to say out loud. Aaliyah Carter had one of those memories, and it didn't start with her. It began with the woman she admired most, her mother. Sergeant First Class Denise Carter wore her uniform like armor, her purpose like a compass. She was a battlefield nurse, forged in the heat of Afghanistan, trained to move toward the blood, not away from it. Her hands had saved lives. Her voice had steadied chaos. She'd returned from war with ribbons and scars, and something no one could see, the unbearable pressure to always be correct. Bombs or bullets didn't mark the day everything changed. It came quietly. A soldier collapsed during drills, short breath, blue lips. Time was slipping. Denise made the call. Administer epinephrine. A younger medic hesitated and reminded her to recheck the allergy sheet. She didn't. Trust me, she said. I've done this before. 7 minutes later, he was gone. The investigation called it a procedural error. The army called it unfortunate. The press didn't call it anything. But Aaliyah, just 10 years old, called it the day her mother disappeared, without ever leaving the room. Because from that moment on, nothing was the same. Denise Carter was still alive in their home, but moved like someone without permission to take up space. The certainty in her walk became hesitation. The warmth in her voice cooled into silence. The woman who used to wake her daughter with gospel music on Sundays now sat at the kitchen table, staring into her hands like they were strangers. Aaliyah never blamed her mother for the mistake. She blamed the world for what it did to her afterward, for erasing her worth because of one moment, for punishing her not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much, too quickly, and without asking first. And that's where the wound started. That's when Aaliyah decided she would never be caught needing anyone's permission. In her eyes, that strength meant never apologizing, hesitating, or letting anyone question whether you deserved to be in the room. She built herself from that silence, from the look on her mother's face the night she packed away her uniform for good, from the unspoken truth that being good at what you do means nothing if the world decides not to forgive you. So when people said Aaliyah had an attitude, they missed the point. She wasn't angry. She was armed with fear, with memory, with the quiet vow that she'd never end up like the woman who once believed rules would protect her. But here's the catch. In trying to never be like her mother, Aaliyah was becoming something more dangerous. A girl who trusted nothing, no one, not even herself. She walked with pride, but it was hollow. She fought battles that hadn't started yet. She was winning arguments and losing pieces of herself. And in that slow unraveling, there was only one question waiting. When a child inherits a silence too loud to carry, who teaches her to speak again? The answer didn't come from a textbook. It came from someone who'd survived her war. Someone who looked her in the eye and didn't flinch. Someone who'd been broken once too, and still showed up. And that, as we'll see, is when the healing began. The hallway didn't go quiet because of fear. It went quiet because something unfamiliar had entered the building. Not a threat, not a storm, but something older than both. The kind of presence that made even time pause. Mrs. Eloise Freeman didn't walk like a substitute teacher. She moved like she had already survived every version of chaos and had stopped waiting for applause. She wore a skirt suit the color of discipline and a wide-brimmed hat that shimmered beneath the fluorescent lights. Her posture alone demanded attention, but it was her silence that unsettled people most. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her stillness spoke louder than most people's shouting. Aaliyah Carter noticed her immediately, not with interest, with resistance. Standing by the front office, this woman was unbothered and unreadable. That wasn't the kind of authority Aaliyah could dismiss with a glance or outmaneuver with words. She walked past her, shoulder stiff, chin high. "You lost, ma'am?" she asked, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Mrs. Freeman didn't even turn her head, just shifted slightly, calmly, and said, "I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Are you?" The words hit harder than intended, not because they were loud, but because they were true. It was the first time in years that Aaliyah felt like someone saw through the performance, not around it, not above it, but through it. And that unnerved her more than any punishment could. Later that morning, as the first bell rang, the name Mrs. Freeman appeared on the substitute board for 8th grade civics, Aaliyah's class. She scoffed. Figures. Just another adult passing through. Another authority figure who'd try to tame her, then retreat when it didn't work. But Mrs. Freeman didn't try to tame anyone. She walked into the classroom like a woman entering a negotiation, not a battlefield. No laptop, no introductions, just a sentence written in firm, slanted cursive on the whiteboard. Discipline is a form of love. Then she posed one question, and one question only. Who are you when no one's watching? There were no instructions, no timer, just silence. Aaliyah stared at her paper, pen frozen. She'd written essays that tore apart court rulings. She'd debated grown men online under a fake name. But she couldn't answer this one. Not because she didn't know, but because she did. She was a daughter afraid to repeat her mother's fall. She was a fighter, afraid of laying down her guard. She was a girl who didn't know if she'd ever been seen without her armor, and wasn't sure she wanted to be. Mrs. Freeman walked the rows slowly. When she reached Aaliyah, she paused. "Still thinking?" she asked gently. Aaliyah didn't look up. "I don't know what you want me to say." Mrs. Freeman nodded. "I don't want you to say anything. I want you to tell yourself the truth." And then she walked on. That moment didn't end in applause. There was no transformation music, but something shifted. Aaliyah didn't know it yet, but a door had opened, quietly, without force. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't slam it shut. She didn't realize that Mrs. Freeman had once been exactly like her. Proud, capable, guarded. The difference was that someone had once waited for her to come around. And now she was doing the same for one girl with a story too heavy to carry alone. The hallway didn't go quiet because of fear. It went quiet because something unfamiliar had entered the building. Not a threat, not a storm, but something older than both. The kind of presence that made even time pause. Mrs. Eloise Freeman didn't walk like a substitute teacher. She moved like she had already survived every version of chaos and had stopped waiting for applause. She wore a skirt suit the color of discipline and a wide-brimmed hat that shimmered beneath the fluorescent lights. Her posture alone demanded attention, But it was her silence that unsettled people most. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her stillness spoke louder than most people's shouting. Aaliyah Carter noticed her immediately, not with interest, with resistance. Standing by the front office, this woman was unbothered and unreadable. That wasn't the kind of authority Aaliyah could dismiss with a glance or outmaneuver with words. She walked past her, shoulder stiff, chin high. "You lost, ma'am?" she asked, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Mrs. Freeman didn't even turn her head, just shifted slightly, calmly, and said, "I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Are you?" The words hit harder than intended, not because they were loud, but because they were true. It was the first time in years that Aaliyah felt like someone saw through the performance, not around it, not above it, but through it, and that unnerved her more than any punishment could. Later that morning, as the first bell rang, the name Mrs. Freeman appeared on the substitute board for 8th grade civics, Aaliyah's class. She scoffed. Figures. Just another adult passing through. Another authority figure who'd try to tame her, then retreat when it didn't work. But Mrs. Freeman didn't try to tame anyone. She walked into the classroom like a woman entering a negotiation, not a battlefield. No laptop, no introductions, just a sentence written in firm, slanted cursive on the whiteboard. Discipline is a form of love. Then she posed one question, and one question only. Who are you when no one's watching? There were no instructions, no timer, just silence. Aaliyah stared at her paper, pen frozen. She'd written essays that tore apart court rulings. She'd debated grown men online under a fake name. But she couldn't answer this one, not because she didn't know, but because she did. She was a daughter afraid to repeat her mother's fall. She was a fighter, afraid of laying down her guard. She was a girl who didn't know if she'd ever been seen without her armor, and wasn't sure she wanted to be. Mrs. Freeman walked the rows slowly. When she reached Aaliyah, she paused. "Still thinking?" she asked gently. Aaliyah didn't look up. "I don't know what you want me to say." Mrs. Freeman nodded. "I don't want you to say anything. I want you to tell yourself the truth." And then she walked on. That moment didn't end in applause. There was no transformation music. But something shifted. Aaliyah didn't know it yet, but a door had opened, quietly, without force. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't slam it shut. She didn't realize that Mrs. Freeman had once been exactly like her, proud, capable, guarded. The difference was that someone had once waited for her to come around, and now she was doing the same for one girl with a story too heavy to carry alone. The real test didn't come in the classroom. It never does. It came in an unremarkable hallway, flickering with dull lights, echoing with sneakers and whispers. Aaliyah Carter was walking alone, her steps slower than usual, and her head was not held high, but level. Something inside her had quieted, not disappeared, just settled. And she was still learning how to carry it. Halfway to the office, she ran a simple errand for her homeroom teacher, no audience, no confrontation, until she turned the corner. Darren Clay. He wasn't new. 8th grader, broad shoulders, eyes that always dared people to flinch first. They hadn't collided before. Not really. Aaliyah avoided him, not out of fear, but because something about him looked like a mirror she wasn't ready to face. But this time, he made the first move. He stuck his arm out as she passed and clipped her shoulder on purpose. Not hard, just enough to claim space, just enough to ask, "What are you going to do now?" The hallway stilled. A beat of silence. then another. In the old days, the Aaliyah everyone knew, she'd have snapped. One glare, one curse, maybe a shove. She would have turned the hallway into a stage, reminding everyone not to mess with her. But something different happened. She stopped, not to lunge, not to fight, just stood still. She turned, not sharply, but slowly, and looked him in the eyes. "You good?" she asked. Calm, clear, not condescending, not afraid. Darren blinked. The smirk he wore faded just a little. He hadn't prepared for this version of her. "You need something?" she added. His jaw worked, like he was chewing a line that no longer tasted right. He scoffed. "Man, whatever," he muttered, and looked away. And that was it. No fireworks, no applause. But the air felt different. Behind her, a door creaked open. Mrs. Freeman had stepped out from a nearby classroom. She didn't say a word, just gave the slightest nod, barely there, but waited like acknowledgement from one soldier to another. Aaliyah nodded back. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. There were no winners, no losers, just a choice made in the middle of habit. And for once, that habit was broken. Later that day, Aaliyah sat in class near the front, not because she was told to, but because it felt right. The whiteboard read, "A strong woman leads, a wise woman listens." It didn't feel like a lesson anymore. It felt like a reminder. She didn't tell anyone about what happened in the hallway, not Mrs. Freeman, not her friends. It was hers, a quiet moment, a decision, a beginning. Because maybe change doesn't announce itself. Perhaps it walks beside you, silently, waiting to see what you'll do when the old version of you taps you on the shoulder and asks to take over again. And maybe the real strength isn't in who flinches first, but who chooses not to swing. They say the loudest person in the room holds the most power. But they rarely ask why that person is so noisy. Maybe it's not confidence. Perhaps it's the echo of someone trying to drown out a silence they never learned to sit with. Aaliyah Carter had been that echo for years. Every sharp word, cold stare, and silent refusal to explain herself was armor, not arrogance. Armor forged from what she'd seen happen to people who let the world inside too easily. But somewhere between the whiteboard question and the hallway decision, a quiet kind of power had begun to rise in her. It didn't come with applause. It didn't come with validation. It came in the form of restraint, of awareness, not realizing that being feared and respected are not the same thing, and never will be. Mrs. Freeman never said that out loud. She never had to. She lived it. Aaliyah began to notice the difference in Mrs. Freeman's speech. There were no raised voices, no repeated instructions. She didn't command the room. She gave it a center to orbit around. And the students responded not out of fear, but something deeper, recognition. A sense that they were being trusted to rise, not forced to obey. That shift lived in the space between instruction and expectation. It's where authentic leadership happens. One afternoon, as the final bell rang, Aaliyah lingered behind. Not for attention, not for praise. She wasn't ready to leave the quiet yet. Mrs. Freeman was wiping down the board, her handwriting still faintly visible beneath the marker stains. Aaliyah asked softly, "How do you do it?" Mrs. Freeman didn't turn right away. She just smiled and said, "Do what?" "Make people listen without raising your voice." Mrs. Freeman turned then, eyes steady, voice calm. "Because I know the difference between fear and respect. Fear fades the moment you walk away, but respect, that stays, even in silence. Aaliyah nodded. She didn't need more. That sentence carried the weight of years. She would carry it too. Because strength isn't in the volume of your voice, it's in how much truth it can carry when you finally decide to speak. It's in knowing when to fight and when to listen. It's in choosing dignity over dominance, again and again, even when no one's watching. The next day, she caught herself before interrupting a classmate. She rewrote a sentence in her journal because the first sounded more like a defense than an idea. She looked at a girl in the cafeteria sitting alone and nodded, just a nod, but one that said, "I see you." And maybe that's what this has always been about. Not silencing power, but redefining it. Not breaking the fire, but teaching it to warm, not burn. The world had taught Aaliyah that she'd be invisible if she weren't in control. But what Mrs. Freeman showed her, without ever needing to say it, is that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who know when to surrender the stage. And in that surrender, they don't disappear. They rise. She didn't plan to come back. Most people don't. Not to the places where they learned how to fight, just to be heard. Not to the hallways that once echoed with footsteps laced in anger. But some stories write themselves in a full circle. And when they do, they bring you home. Not because you owe it, but because you understand it better now. Aaliyah Carter returned to Langston Hughes Middle School not as a student, but as a woman who had carried her silence long enough. A woman who had sharpened her mind in courtrooms from Baltimore to Baton Rouge, who had stood beside mothers who'd lost sons and teenagers who'd never been given a second chance. A civil rights attorney. Fierce, deliberate, undefeated in spirit, even when the law didn't bend. She spoke with precision now, not volume. Her voice didn't push. It pierced. But no matter where the headlines took her, Saturdays were reserved. She drove back to the same brick building every Saturday morning with chipped paint and flickering lights. Same parking lot. There is a broken water fountain near the front office. Only now, she walked in, not as the girl who once dared the world to break her, but as a woman who'd been damaged and rebuilt herself with care. She didn't bring speeches. She brought questions. In room 2114, still smelling faintly of dry erase markers and old carpet, students sat waiting. Some had heard of her. Most hadn't. That was the point. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to mirror. She'd write on the board, "Who are you when no one's watching?" Same 6 words. Same question that once stopped her cold. Then she'd wait. The class would fidget, whisper, and roll their eyes, but eventually someone would ask, "What does it even mean?" And she'd smile. "It means you still have time to find out." What followed wasn't a lecture. It was about fear, mistakes, and choosing who you want to be when you no longer fear becoming someone new. She didn't quote law books. She mentioned her mother. She quoted Mrs. Freeman. She quoted silence. There was a reason she came back. Because in every classroom, one student always didn't raise their hand. One who sat in the back, chin high, arms folded. She could spot them instantly. She'd been there. And to that one student, she'd offer a nod. Not loud, not public, but exact. Because sometimes all it takes is to be seen, once, clearly, for everything to change. As the students filed out at the end of the hour, Aaliyah would erase the board slowly. Always the last to leave. Always be careful not to wipe too fast. Because she knew now, growth doesn't happen in the spotlight. It occurs in the quiet. On Saturdays, you give back in the rooms where someone once waited for you to stop pretending. And maybe, just maybe, the truest kind of justice isn't only in the courtroom. It's in showing up. Some stories don't end. They echo. Long after the classroom emptied, long after the chalk dust settled, and the echoes of her voice were replaced by other voices, younger, louder, still learning to speak, Aaliyah Carter's story lingered. Not in fame, not in headlines, but in the quiet spaces people often overlook. It lingered in a folded slip of paper, yellowing slightly, creased from being opened and read again too many times. The kind students tucked into pockets and journals, passed between hands without words. On it, in the same careful, slanted handwriting that once filled the whiteboard, were these words: "The loudest voice in the room isn't always the strongest. Sometimes it's just the most afraid." It wasn't a slogan. It was a mirror. And it didn't demand change. It invited it. That paper, that line, traveled. It ended up taped to bedroom walls and folded inside graduation caps, scribbled on courtroom notepads and tattooed on forearms. For some, it was a reminder to soften. For others, to stand taller. For many, it was the first time someone had put chaos into language. Because what Aaliyah left behind wasn't just a legacy. It was permission. Permission to be more than your past. Permission to speak gently and still be heard. Permission to walk into a room and not need to own it, understand it. There was a student once, in 8th grade, who was quiet, sat in the back, and never spoke. Everyone assumed they didn't care. Aaliyah saw otherwise. On the last day of her Saturday session, she handed them a blank card. "This is for when you know who you are," she said. Years later, that student became a teacher. They still carried the card. Not because of what was written, but because it had been given in silence, with belief, not instruction. Mrs. Freeman had once told Aaliyah that true strength lives in the moments no one claps for. She was right. The quiet decisions, the steady listening, the courage to not respond to provocation, but to purpose. These are the things the world doesn't reward, but always remembers. And now, every time Aaliyah's name was mentioned, not in courtrooms, but in whispers between students, it carried weight. Not because she'd become someone important, but because she had once been someone invisible. She chose not to stay that way. Back in room 214, a new teacher had taken her place. But the question never changed. It remained etched beneath layers of marker on that whiteboard, faint but permanent. Who are you when no one's watching? And somewhere, a student would read it for the first time, scoff, roll their eyes, then sit back in their chair, just a little quieter than before. Something would shift, not break, just shift. Because healing doesn't always come with music or tears. Sometimes it comes with a sentence. Sometimes it comes with a nod. Sometimes it comes when someone you've never met believes in a version of you you haven't yet become. And when it does, it stays. Long after the room has emptied, long after the story seems finished. It stays, because the strongest truths don't shout. They echo. Maybe the story of Aaliyah Carter isn't just about a girl finding her voice. Maybe it's about all of us, those who were taught to shout to be heard, to harden to survive, to fight because softness seemed dangerous. But what if strength is something else entirely? What if strength is choosing to listen, especially when you've been hurt? What if true power is walking away, not because you're weak, but because you finally know who you are? In that quiet hallway, Aaliyah didn't just shift her path. She redefined what it means to be strong for herself and anyone watching. So now, we turn to you. What would you have done in that hallway? Have you ever had to choose between pride and peace, reaction and restraint, fear and respect? Tell us your story, right here in the comments. Say it. Share it, because your voice might be what someone out there needs to hear today. And if this story touched something in you, if it made you pause, breathe deeper, see yourself or someone you love, then don't let it end here. Like, share, subscribe to our channel. Not for us, for the next person who needs this story more than they know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling this with us. And wherever you are, may your next decision be gentle, your voice be steady, and your day be filled with everything true. Until next time, stay human, stay kind, and stay becoming.